The year is 2008. Akiyuki Shinbo is sitting at his desk, animating for the studio Shaft. As he sits there, fingers in motion, he contemplates. He's been working in this industry since the early 1980s, and while he loves his work in the medium as a whole, he can't shake this feeling from inside him. There is a yearning for more. Something has brewed to the point of no return. An idea from deep inside him wishes to take form. On a completely normal day, a day like any other, he reaches out to Aniplex's Atsuhiro Iwakami, film producer in the medium, and he simply says, "I want to create a new Magical Girl series." Iwakami was fully aware of Shinbo's talent, so rather than giving him the power to adapt a pre-existing IP, he wanted to give his abilities complete free reign. He gave Shinbo the chance to create an original work with a completely fresh team of writers and character designers. Shinbo and Iwakami plan to create a series that is accessible to the general anime fan. With the help of a visual novelist / anime scriptwriter still trying to make a name for themselves, Gen Urobuchi. They created a series that was so beloved by people, it single-handedly changed the perception people had of the magical girl genre. They created a series so memorable, it became the face of the anime industry that year. They created a series that was my all-time favorite piece of media until only recently when a new series came out. They created a story that would forever change the way in which people perceive anime. And what they created, you ask? Well, they created Madoka Magica. It's been over 12 years since the series was first released, and over 10 years since the story seemingly ended on one of the biggest cliffhangers and yet biggest plot expanders in the anime medium. But on the 10th of September in the year 2023, we got a glimpse at the long-awaited sequel, and not to overreact, but I was one more cancellation announcement from setting fire to the local orphanage. I still have my lighter from my teenage years. I could walk over there right now! Madoka Magica is a series that those who watched fell in love with, but nowadays it's not an easy series to sell to people in the same way series like School Life and Main Abyss are. Recommending a series with both adorable visuals but trying to convince people that it's still an upsettingly dark series is like asking a woman out on a date and she says yes. It's never gonna happen. Well, at least from my experience. It takes one look at this series to have an immediate judgment of it, but look quick to look at a title, to look at an image, and deduce their own feelings about it before fully digesting what these things are and what they could mean. For example, take a look at most manga readers. Lots of people who are experiencing a web-based manga might spend 5 to 10 seconds looking at a double-page spread, only to move on from it quickly to continue the story at their own pace, not fully being able to digest the smaller details of the panel, or truly ingesting the amount of time that goes into those pages. Now, I'm not belittling anybody who does this. Everyone has their own means of showing respect to a creator in their works. Believe me, to an extent, I could relate, and there is nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just testament to how good the story in the manga is that people naturally don't want to wait to see what's on the next page. But what does this have to do with Madoka Magica? Well, it's because when I first saw Madoka Magica, I too judged the book by its cover. When I first started watching Madoka Magica, I didn't love it. Sure, the visual direction was unique and surreal, but it was televised, and there wasn't an urge to tune in every day of that week to watch it. It'd be on at strange times, and it would seemingly be on once every 2 months or so. Finding the time to watch it felt more like a chore than it did an experience, so I let it disappear. I let it go. That was until it found me again, on a now dissolved streaming service called Funimation, in October of the same year. I tried again, for the sake of saying I gave it a proper shot, and oh my god, am I happy I did. Because this time, I made it past the turning point. This time, I made it past episode 3. This video's aim is to reminisce over the brilliance of this work and explain why I thoroughly believe that this series is not just a masterpiece, but even to this day, one of the greatest pieces of fiction ever created. So obviously there will be spoilers throughout this video, as I'll be talking about the anime and specific scenes from it, as well as the film. So I'd encourage you to watch the series for yourself. Give it 3 episodes. Trust me, you won't regret it. Plus, I'm pretty sure this anime was the pioneer for the 3-episode rule, so you can take that with a grain of salt. And not to mention, I'll be going through this series at a really quick speed that just doesn't do the brilliant work the true justice it deserves. Let's start from the very beginning. Viewers are immediately thrown into the universe, no exposition to be found. It opens to an ominously dark fight between a magical girl dressed in black and purple and a giant floating being, with a bystander witnessing the devastation unfold, all to a haunting Calafina track. You immediately can tell that this gargantuan being is at the source of this devastation, and that the magical girl in focus is the one trying to prevent its devastation from spreading, only for what appears to be a fluffy contractor of sorts appearing to give the bystander the chance to become a magical girl to help in the fight against the enemy, in exchange for a wish of her choosing. She then awakens from her sleep, implying it to be a dream. Now, immediately, there's a lot of things I want to say about this sequence alone. First and foremost, I love this opener, specifically from a writing perspective. You have to remember, this show was made to be accessible, and the way this scene does that is just perfect. Its audience is expected to be newbies to the shoujo AI genre, but also it anticipates absolute veterans as well. How do you encourage people who haven't experienced this genre before, and how do you keep those who have interested? Well, it's simple. You mislead both of them. Viewers will react to this moment in one of two ways: completely oblivious to how these types of stories are told, and that they merely think that this is indeed a dream, or could be aware that in traditional narratives, this alludes to the idea of Madoka seeing a glimpse into the future. But if you're like me, someone who is more or less used to what the genre had on offer at the time, you may have thought to yourself, nice style, but I'm pretty sure I already know where this is going. In fact, you may have actually felt a small hint of confusion during this scene. And look, it's super subtle, it's super small, but I'm certain there is a fair few people out there who had the exact same reaction I did. During this moment, you see the magical girl in question seemingly scream out, but no words are heard. And I'm not kidding when I say I directly recall thinking, strange animation choice there, but sure, whatever. And the very fact that I hold on to this very, very specific memory, this incredibly small memory even, proof that this series had an impression on me. But we'll get to that later. Ooh, foreshadowing! The anime from the get-go is putting forward the idea of the magical girl genre and what it means. For veterans, it's asking you, what do you usually see in this genre? And for newbies, it's telling you, this is what this genre is all about. From cute visuals of high school girls with various personalities and colourful hairstyles, to the idea of magical girls being people who fight for justice against the evils of the world. It provides you with a cast that feels nostalgic for newbies in that they can probably relate their high school conversations to some extent with this cast, or even formulaic if you're a veteran of the genre. You have the naive but overly sweet leading character, a best friend who brings humour to her life and motivates her, you have a magical girl with emo vibes shrouded in ambiguity, you have a teacher who's way too overly expressive about how bad her dating life is. All pretty stock standard stuff, I think. Okay, ignore that last one. Calling Kazuko Sadame stock standard is just proof you have garbage taste in women. It's presenting you to a safe space that you've either never seen before or have seen hundreds of times. Whilst in a very quiet, almost unhearable tone, it's telling you, ever so softly, it's all a lie. And the source of that voice is Akame Homura. From the beginning of the series, viewers are drawn into this character. A clear magical girl veteran who previously appeared in Madoka's dream. This person seems to know Madoka's name and even way around the school despite only having just transferred to this country. She seems almost otherworldly compared to everyone, maintaining a pretty cold frame and a sheer hatred towards the entity Kyubey. Kyubey is this adorable little fluff ball that turns people into magical girls at the benefit of granting their wish. Essentially in the magical girl genre, the plot device that enables the leading cast to become magical girls in the first place is Kyubey's role. Again, this feels pretty stock standard for a series that is meant to feel like a traditional magical girl show. But the one thing from the get-go that doesn't seem to quite fit is Homura herself. From the very beginning of the series, she's a warning. It's a warning that goes unheard until episode 3. Madoka encounters another magical girl named Mami, who has been a magical girl for quite some time. Both Madoka and her best friend Sayaka look up to her despite not being magical girls themselves. They admire her desire to protect humanity through the shadows of the labyrinth, and Madoka is inspired to take steps in her own life to be someone she can be proud of. Madoka seemingly feels she is average and without any real special talents. She believes she is incapable of helping others, so when seeing Mami, she is compelled to take on Kyubey's deal of becoming a magical girl and helping Mami protect humanity. We as viewers also fall for Mami's charm. She's cool, she's confident. Her design is absolutely spectacular, and her gun magic is just so much fun to watch unfold, especially with her creative use of it. Mami's way of interacting with people feels reassuring, as if she is fulfilling the role of the organized group leader, a character again we've seen before as veterans, and a character we are drawn to if we're newbies. When Mami and Madoka are alone, Madoka expresses her desire to become a magical girl alongside her. It is here that an emotion that isn't too familiar with this genre brews. Mami expresses gratitude because with Madoka, she won't feel so alone in her fight against the witches going forward. Mami expresses to Madoka that she became a magical girl out of desperation, and that her wish is what saved her. But that doesn't mean she's fully accepting of her circumstances. It's an interesting storyline that even those conditioned to anime as a whole might have felt a little swayed by. Shoujo AI is usually full of warm things of friendship and family, but with this one character, with this one moment, it uses the genre to explore a different avenue that was just unconventional in these types of stories for the time, having our mentor character show a true, raw weakness on full display. But the writing tries to cover that hint of dread up really quickly by utilizing Mami's mentorship role, having her puppeteer the conversation to immediately break away from her showing weakness, by trying to help Madoka figure out what she should wish for when she becomes a magical girl. Madoka seemingly isn't sure of what to wish for. She merely wants to sign the contract and feels as if she's a part of something that is helping people. To maintain that theme of warm conversation, Mami simply suggests, why not wish for a big cake to celebrate? But when she becomes a magical girl, once they escape this labyrinth after defeating the witch, and Madoka gleefully agrees. Together they reunite with Sayaka, and Mami demonstrates her full fighting abilities against the powerful witch, who owns this labyrinth. Using her magic to summon guns and cannons, she's absolutely decimating the witch before her, continually brutalizing it with her mastery of ranged attacks. We watch this brilliance of her confidence just unfold, and it's awesome. It truly feels like we're watching a rebirth of a character in real time. But there is just one problem. Confidence is Mami's downfall. I can't describe to you what it was like for me watching this brilliantly tragic moment on full display. It doesn't require a visual depiction of heavy gore to illustrate the gravity and despair of the situation. It gives you just the right amount of information to make your heart pound, your mind bend, and your fear stir. A character who was on the cover of the series, a character who seemingly was going to be our squad's mentor, a character whose character had yet to be fleshed out and had only just started taking shape, a character with extensive merchandise. Look, she has plushies! Someone who fans adored, with fan art, with memes, someone you care about is taken away from you in an instant to a score that is seemingly mocking you. The song quite literally translates to, cheese, cheese, where's the cheese? Cheese, cheese, I want here. Now there's a double meaning in this, especially when the truth of the witches is revealed, but we'll come back to that later. But the other, more subtle meaning of this moment and provided score is the way it paints Mami as something less than human. Despite the prowess we had just seen on screen, this witch known as the Desert Witch Charlotte, but to make it easier we'll call her Bebe, takes her out within 60 seconds. This song paints that power dynamic masterfully. Mami is treated like she is food, treated like cheese, and the witch of this labyrinth is incredibly hungry. This series was televised on the ABC, by the way. It shared time slots with Bananas and Pajamas and Spot Goes to School. This is the turning point in the series for multiple reasons. Firstly, it is the moment that shatters old preconceptions about the series first viewers may have had. Secondly, it's merely the beginning of the hell that is to unfold. And thirdly, I'd argue the most important, it's the moment that challenges our beloved characters for the first time in a way I have quite literally never seen done before. Well, at least for the time. Having witnessed that grim moment, both Sayaka and Madoka are completely put off the idea of becoming magical girls. While they fight for justice and the balance of the world, what they have to endure in silence is equally terrible. Madoka also struggles with her own set of morals, feeding into her own guilt and promising to join Mami in the magical girl world, only now to back out, with Sayaka trying to come to terms with the trauma they just experienced, and decide whether or not they should just detach themselves from that world completely. I love this kind of character writing, illustrating character flaws in a very honest and vulnerable way, not hiding from parts of themselves that they also don't like putting out. It just shows a real essence of relatability inside their views. Despite this being a challenge so detached from our reality, what we experience as viewers is a real honest and human reaction. Speaking of character writing, I think to talk about the next huge segment in the series, I need to go into greater detail about Sayaka. The series, at first, best friend stereotype, but as you watch the show, you learn just how complex and brilliantly written her character actually is. Sayaka, a high school girl who harbours a crush on Kyosuke, a former classmate with an incredible gift of playing violin, though he unfortunately lost his gift due to a sudden loss of malfunction in his fingers. Sayaka visits Kyosuke frequently in the hospital and they share special moments together, listening to music, believing that Kyosuke, as a previous musician, would think kindly of the favour. For a while, this seems true, until finally one day he snaps the diagnosis that he will never truly recover. Sayaka becomes a magical girl, wishing to free Kyosuke of his misery by granting him the gift of mobility again. With him cured and playing violin, he even returns to school, though Sayaka never tells him the truth of his recovery. There are multiple reasons for this. Magical girls naturally have to hide their identities, and the impact of witches is in the form of natural disasters or manipulation of human bodies through their emotions. It's a hard thing to prove their existence to outsiders looking in, but I would argue the case is much more simpler, and much more brilliant than that. The reason behind this decision brings out a layer of depth in Sayaka's character that I cannot, to this day, get over. Throughout her entire relationship with Kyosuke, she never explicitly tells him how she feels. She's always been this kind of person incapable of speaking her honest thoughts, blanketing her emotions in humour and, at times, pure silence. To become a magical girl means you're accepting of a forever lonely existence. She was aware of this from the beginning and yet still took on that role, and that would prove to be her greatest downfall, because what awaited her was something far worse than Mami's fate. The painfully but brilliantly obvious truth about Sayaka is that her emotions rule her decision making. Her love for this boy surpassed all logic and reason, taking on the cruel fate of a magical girl for a truly simple wish. Deep down, she just wants Kyosuke to look at her, to be the one who confesses, but that future never comes to pass. Moving forward a bit, we are introduced to the wonderful Kyoko Sakura, a confident veteran who runs most of the turf due to Mami's disappearance. Kyoko detests Sayaka because of the carelessness of their wish. Kyoko was robbed of a childhood and had no choice but to become a magical girl in order to survive. Sayaka repulses her. The fight is interrupted, however, when Homura makes her grand appearance and stops the conflict. Though that is only a temporary solution, as the two reunite again anyway one night and face off. Though it is on this night that they, and we, learn of one of many horrific truths. Madoka, informed by Kyubey that the two are fighting, rushes to their location, and in a fit of emotion and desperation, takes Sayaka's soul gem and throws it away in an act of rebellion against their meaningless conflict. But as soon as this happens, Sayaka goes completely limp. In fact, Sayaka dies, leaving ourselves, Kyoko, and Madoka confused and horrified. You feel that in Kyoko. A girl who is seemingly a veteran in the field is equally as confused as we are. So begins one of the most unforgettable exchanges I've ever heard in an anime. Kyubey, an entity born without fear, born without sympathy, a being who exists to secure balance, devoid of real emotion, finally begins to unravel his true, unapologetically ugly colours. It states that when someone becomes a magical girl, they completely cease to be human. Their body is used to create the soul gem that their magical energy is stored into, and they are instead given a hollow corpse that looks just like them to inherit instead. This is the only way to maintain their abilities as magical girls, as the human body is incapable of maintaining so much magical energy. Magical girls aren't girls anymore. Magical girls are merely this. And Kyubey explains this existentialism with not a hint of malice in its voice. It explains this incredibly dark concept in the same soft-spoken manner it has always spoken. What I find so frightening about Kyubey as a character is how throughout the entire series, they've never felt out of place. It's always blended in with the characters of the story as just a contractor. It never explicitly lies to people who sign a contract with them, but it never cares to explain what it truly takes to become a magical girl. And it does that not just because despair is part of the magical girl process, but because it simply doesn't understand what it means to live. It doesn't understand what it means to feel. And without that understanding, it acts. It does what it needs to do, not caring who is affected by it, because it refuses to try and understand it. No, it's incapable of understanding it, and that alone makes them one of the most terrifying characters I have ever seen in anime. Time moves forward, and the third member of the group, Hitomi Shizuku, exclaims she's had a crush on Kyosuke for a long time, but is aware of Sayaka's feelings because, as her friend, she's paid attention to her. She gives Sayaka the chance to confess to him before she decides to herself, but Sayaka is perplexed by these revelations, both Hitomi's confession and Sayaka's crush being exposed. So, how does Sayaka respond? Well, in the way Sayaka has always conducted herself. She lies. She says, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Sayaka is incapable of being honest with herself. Sayaka is afraid of being truthful to her own desires. Sayaka, deep down, is a really selfish person, but she refuses to confront that part of herself. So, what does she do now? Nothing. She lets Hitomi confess and rapidly begins her fall into despair, fighting witches just to feel something, seemingly enjoying being torn apart by these creatures. She fights without grace, she fights without purpose, she fights because that is all she knows now. Pushing those closest to her away, pushing those who are trying to help her, she becomes completely isolated in her despair. Kyoko does what she can, trying to listen to her true feelings, but it's too late. The darkness inside her has taken complete hold of her soul gem, and thus begins her transformation. Thus begins her cruel fate as a witch. This curveball, I remember, threw me for a loop completely. In fact, I have fond memories of the moment I made that connection as to what was happening in the first place. And I'm sure a lot of you understand and also feel that. I recall my younger self, sitting at his desk in his Baywatch singlet, head tilted upwards to face the ceiling. And I remember, specifically, mouthing the words, "Oh my god." The reason why I remember that moment so fondly is because I couldn't vocalize those words. I could only mimic them because I was so tense and taken aback by the revelation that I just made, and that feeling never left. The grief seeds used to restore the magical girl's power are the seeds born from witches. Witches only exist because magical girls despair. This whole series is a vicious, twisted, and horrible cycle, with young girls being sacrificed to maintain some kind of status quo. Every witch we have seen up until this point was once a magical girl who succumbed to their fate, succumbed to their own despair. Sayaka's story is just one of hundreds, no, one of thousands. And the truth is, only known to Kyubey. You would be silly to assume, why don't they just ask, what's the catch, before signing up? Because despair is a part of the process, and above all else, becoming a witch or losing your body to obtain powers are not what Kyubey would consider a catch. Before we move on, I want to take a moment to also really appreciate the work of Gekidan Inukari. They're a small division that work within Studio Shaft and have a distinctive style that draws inspiration from Russian and Czech animation. They bring out both the beauty and horror in the labyrinths themselves, whilst also creating visceral depictions of people's despair through their designs of the witches, utilizing stop motion as well as animating witches in a different style and frame rate to bring out their otherworldliness, with leading main cast character designer Umeaki assisting with the witches to help make their forms representative of the ideas within Madoka Magica. The very design of Sayaka's witch form is inspired by her character as a whole. It takes on the form of a musical conductor, inspired by her shared love of music with her crush, though this form is forced to bear a smile, the same kind Sayaka wore whenever confronted with parts of herself she didn't want to admit as truth. All the while, violinists feed her ears with their playing, following only her, like her deep desire for Kyosuke to look only at her. It's also reminiscent of a mermaid/siren, which is a common behavior in stories of luring people to the ocean and drowning them. Kyoko's witch form is also known as Ophelia, who, again in Shakespearean literature, dies from drowning. And well, Bebe, or her true identity as a magical girl known as Nagisa, was a child born to an abusive mother. Her mother was a sickly woman who blames her hospitalization on Nagisa's birth. Nagisa was a child who just wanted their mother to treat them better, so she wishes to give her mother the greatest cheesecake she's ever tasted. Pause! Mika from the editing stage here. I realized I went on a crazy tangent regarding Mağıya, which is the game. It's not the anime, so I'm going to stop talking about that because this is a video about the anime. So to cut a long spiel short, I'll just say this. The labyrinth showcasing the hospital room and the cheese and desert-like center of it all has significance if you've played Mağıya, but if not, it still allows people who are watching the anime to have a fresh and unique perspective on the character Bebe. It allows people to interpret the kind of magical girl she was prior to her witch transformation. Clearly a child because they enjoyed sweets and cheese. Which just makes the whole backstory of this witch even more terrible, because people would make that connection and think, this was a real child, this wasn't a teenager, but quite possibly the youngest magical girl we've ever seen. Oh, I'm being wiped away, this is a fun transition. Once again, this shit was on the ABC. It shared a time slot with Bottle Top Bill and his best friend Corky. I think the reason this series just works immaculately is that it handles a brilliant balance between its visual storytelling and exposition. Nothing about this series feels forced or suffocating, regardless of how much anime you've watched. It takes an insane amount of skill to write a story about characters with pre-written fates in the context of the story, but somehow find an effective and clean way to make that premise interesting, whilst also denying that premise completely. Madoka Magica does this incredible thing where it gives these abhorrently tragic moments a strangely bittersweet but beautiful meaning. A really great example of this is Sayaka and Kyoko's fate. Sayaka drowns in her loneliness, yet it's a loneliness Kyoko has felt her entire life. Having nobody but herself to keep her afloat, she's robbed of dreams and ambitions, outright denied a childhood and the chances to grow closer to people. It's a void she has forever felt, and it's a void Sayaka is now becoming familiar with. To ensure the tragic witch isn't alone in their despair, isn't alone in their death, Kyoko sacrifices herself to put an end to both of their misery, so that at the very end of life, in the darkest depths of death itself, they are not alone in it. It's strange because, technically, they lose this fight, but I'd also argue that they won it. That theme of loneliness is also prominent throughout this entire series, and we'll get to that more, but for now, I want to talk about where the anime series ends. I really feel the need to talk about the one character outside of Kyubey who knew the truth behind this show well and truly before any of us did. The lingering voice in the background, whose appearances always felt so out of place, but always gripped you whenever they made their appearance on screen. The character that made this series my all-time favourite for so long, Homura Akame. As stated from the beginning of this video, Homura is framed to be a character who clearly knows a lot more than what she alludes to. She seems to have a greater understanding of the role of magical girls, as well as the role of Kyubey from the very beginning. When Mami is first about to fight Bebe, Homura tries to warn her to leave the labyrinth with Madoka. She also was completely aware of Bebe's fighting style, and knows exactly how to counter her attacks. When Sayaka and Kyoko battle, Homura stops them. When Sayaka's soul gem gets thrown away by Madoka, she disappears immediately to fetch it, knowing that it is the very life of those who inherit it. At the very beginning of the series, Homura knows Madoka's name, where the nurse's office is, and is the very one who issues the warning of becoming a magical girl to her. Homura Akame knows about everything, and yet Kyubey doesn't know anything about her. And yet the series has always sneakily given us hints about her trick through her use of magic alone. Homura's magic seemingly stops time, but little did we realize just how much refinement her ability has gone through. She can seamlessly rewind time as well. She's basically like that Will Smith guy.
It's rewind time.
What I adore about Homura as a character is that despite having all this pre-existing knowledge of the events to follow, she makes it clear from how she conducts herself how she is simply just one person, and that one person is far more frail and broken than anyone else. The cold demeanor we see isn't a tough bravado at all. It's the demeanor of someone who has experienced countless trauma in their life, that they have become completely conditioned to their misery. The only thing keeping her afloat and reminding themselves of their humanity is Madoka herself. The giant threat we see at the beginning is soon to destroy the girl's entire town and everyone that lives in it. This will eradicate all unless it's stopped. However, it has amassed an unrivaled amount of magical power that seemingly no one can defeat. Yet Homura tries, over and over again, manipulating situations in order to achieve different outcomes. But nothing ever works. In particular, she wants Madoka herself to at least live, as in truth, they share a much deeper and beautiful relationship. Swearing to try to stop Madoka from ever becoming a magical girl, she rewrites time over and over and over again, doing everything she can to save the very person she loves most. It's an upsettingly dark but beautiful love story that seemingly will never bear fruits. You know this. You know by now that any other traditional story will tell you that if you try and try again, things will work out eventually, but as we know, this series deliberately is unconventional. Every time Homura rewrites time, the more powerful the witch Madoka is fated to transform into becomes, making a witch far more devastating than the Walpurgis even after its defeat. No matter what route she takes, the end result is always the same. No matter how loud Homura shouts, her voice is destined never to reach. And, well, we actually see this exact thing at the very beginning of the series. I cannot stress just how amazingly embarrassed I was watching this moment unfold for the first time. I remember thinking back to the superiority I shamelessly displayed when I first saw this scene and merely labeled it a strange sound design choice. And then I see this truth unfold right here, and I felt a brilliant shame and honestly a real guilt. Even I, as a viewer, failed to hear Homura's call, and if that's not art, I don't know what is. Let's move on to the final aspect of the series that I want to talk about, the finale. Homura, at her wit's ends, has become completely broken. Reflecting on herself, she realizes that rewriting time again and again is only dooming the world further, and she knows it. But her love for Madoka has driven her to find that route out, to find that future for her. But after facing Walpurgis alone, extorting all of her options, she still continues to lose, knowing that it's just making Madoka suffer more and more, and even she's at her limit, as she's about to quit. Finally, Madoka makes her grand appearance. Madoka, the leading character in this story, in this final timeline, still hasn't become a magical girl, but knows that she must. She cannot bear to let Homura suffer alone anymore. She cannot bear to continually forget. Madoka, being saved over and over and over again, has ensured her capabilities at stopping the Walpurgis and saving everyone who's left, enabling her the power to save Homura. But the problem of the witch that Madoka will become still remains. But with all this hindsight, with all this trauma, within it lies the answer. Madoka's wish is for all the witches to have never existed, to eradicate their existence both in the past and the future. But in order to do this, Madoka herself will become the cycle the incubators need to sustain the balance of the world. She'll forever fight and forever be forgotten by everyone. She'll be erased from existence, but forced to exist in solitude against a never-ending enemy. Homura deems this an existence far worse than merely dying, but Madoka has always put other people first. Always been someone who fights for someone else. By taking on this role, she'll be able to alleviate old, current, and future magical girls from their sorrow. While they will die, they won't die in anguish or despair. Madoka will become everyone's secret hope, but Homura will be the only one to remember her, and with that, she's erased from the world, as if she never existed. It is only through Homura that she is never truly forgotten. However, with the concept of the cycle forgotten, even to the incubators, a new system must take place. While Madoka's fight is integral to the survival of the planet, negative emotions will always exist, and those negative emotions must bear a form. They are now these entities called wraiths, and the ones to fight them are the currently existing magical girls, though they now will never have to bear the curse of falling into despair and becoming a witch because they don't exist and never will. This time, thankfully, the magical girls will not continue to suffer even after they perish. Now listen, to a lot of people this ending might be just a cop-out, but I'd argue it's actually perfect for Madoka Magica, and here's why. Madoka Magica is a tragedy with a thematic focus on loneliness and how we as humans fail to fill that void. Sometimes our voices are never truly heard no matter how much we scream. Sometimes we fail to even communicate our true thoughts and feelings. There's always a loneliness in us that we can't exactly feel, and this story articulates that beautifully. Magical girls who are fighting this common enemy are now no longer fighting alone, because no matter how alone and cold they feel, they are now able to stand back up and move. They know that now and always, somewhere, someone is fighting for you. As long as you remember her, you are not alone. Throughout this show, we've seen that fate over and over and over again, but now there is a small voice that is almost unheard, that is always cheering them on, and even if it's quiet, it's still there. The magical girls now will never truly be by themselves, and I think that's fucking beautiful. It feels as if everything is concluded, and the world will now just continue in this new, lighter age of a witchless world. Everything sure is happy and nice, and we're done here. What is this? No, there's more? No, please! I can't! I'm tired of suffering! Stop! 2 years later, the sequel movie, Madoka Magica: The Rebellion, was released. The sequel to a story we didn't know we needed until we got it. Despite what the members of the Trash Taste podcast think.
Yeah, like there was technically a sequel movie, and everyone tries to forget that it exists.
It was shit. I'll just say it's shit. I'll go on a limb and I'll say it's shit.
No, Connor, you're shit! But also, like, incredibly handsome and very pretty. And the film starts in a really peculiar way. Homura is briefing us on the events of the anime, and we are then shown what looks like a chase sequence with an entity resembling a witch. But there are just a few immediate problems. Madoka, for one, is here. So is Sayaka. So is Kyoko? Mami as well? Wait, isn't that the witch that ate her? I thought witches were erased from this world. It's confusing. Nothing about it seems right, but before you have time to process it, Madoka awakens. Just like in the original anime. In fact, wait. It opens with almost the exact same opening as the anime. In fact, it's reusing animation and dialogue from the recap movies, but there are a few minor differences. For one, Kyubey is here, but they aren't vocalizing any words, and Madoka is wearing some kind of inconspicuous ring. You begin to doubt yourself as you're watching this movie. Is this a reboot? Is this a remake? But then you recall the very first few minutes, which clearly outline the events of the original series. As your brain continues to explode, the movie just continues at a rapid pace. And what you hope will be just a little bit of clarity immediately follows with even more confusion when we suddenly arrive at school. Where Hitomi once stood, now lays Kyoko there instead. The characters communicate in a way that implies they've known each other for years, but Kyoko wasn't a character who was introduced until the middle of the series. There is something really strange in the continuity of this film. You see, this movie is, without question, a direct sequel to the anime, but as you watch it, you're perplexed as to where in the timeline this is meant to fit. I mean, the wraiths are here in this universe, but, well, so is Madoka, and Homura seems to have reverted back to her original personality prior to the events of the original series. She's shy and cheerful, but also seemingly feels she wanted to have a cute conversation with Madoka for a long time, but doesn't know why. And, well, so does Madoka, as if they haven't seen each other in ages, but apparently we're already acquainted in the movie, so I ask, what the fuck is happening? Why are all these girls, alive? I mean, sure, I'm happy, but also, this is Madoka Magica. There is no way this isn't doomed to end in suffering somehow. Stop giving me hope, Udabuchi-sensei. I lost hope years ago when I decided to become a YouTuber. That confusion is, again, why I love this series so much. Just like the original season, the franchise is still doing everything it can to subvert the expectations of their newly created audience. This audience now knows what Madoka Magica is all about and how complex a narrative it can be. Yet, with nothing but a grin, the team behind Rebellion still managed to keep us perplexed. The The movie is actually about Homura. It's a deep dive into a character after the events of the original anime. Homura finds herself in the labyrinth of a witch who somehow seemed to seep through the cracks despite their supposed erasure when Madoka became the Law of Cycles. This witch seemed to manipulate the minds of our characters, both pre-existing the Law of Cycles and thereafter. It's not necessarily hostile, but it's pulling the strings of a reality in a way that defies Madoka's sacrifice, though how it conducts itself is the most intriguing part about it. This witch is manipulating people's memories and actions, but shows little to no hostility. It's feeding the characters who inhabit this universe a false reality, but that reality is pretty peaceful, and it's so perfectly articulated that it's actually convinced those who inhabit it that it is their genuine reality. We know from an outsider's perspective that something is amiss, but even as the film goes on, before it becomes a bit more clearer, we are slowly but surely beginning to believe the lie this film is providing for us. Homura is only able to discover the fact she's within a labyrinth because as time goes on, the faces of the people around her begin to distort, as if the witch's curse is already beginning to fade. Her views of the people around her are also beginning to mess with her. As mentioned earlier, she feels she and Madoka have been wanting to talk for a long time, but glimpses of memories and past feelings slowly begin to flood into her, and then begins to descend into the labyrinth alone. Naturally, Homura believes it to be Bebe, as it is the only witch supposedly left in existence after Madoka became the Law of Cycles, and it's fair to assume us as viewers would probably think the same. It's the most out-of-place character outside of Madoka, except when threatened for information, Bebe is confused. It seems defensive and refuses to return with hostility. Mami catches up, and having her memories clearly altered, her relationship with Bebe is a completely friendly one. She challenges Homura to what is, objectively speaking, the slickest gunfight I have seen. Like, goddamn, look at this shit, man! What is even happening? This is metal as fuck! They're like 14, by the way. Homura loses the fight but manages to escape thanks to Sayaka's sudden appearance. And this is when the film really begins to unveil and reward viewers who are really paying attention, whilst also bewildering that same audience with new twists and developments. After a small respite, Sayaka has a Freudian slip of sorts and refers to Bebe as someone who used to be a witch, when trying to figure out why Homura would attack her. She also very clearly remembers Madoka, which doesn't make sense. Not just that, she's aware of that horrible cycle as well. Sayaka's placement in this labyrinth is now just as confusing as Bebe's. Homura then assumes that Sayaka is the witch in question, chasing her down. However, she's interrupted by this world's Madoka. A beautiful exchange takes place between these two, and if I'm honest, it is probably one of my favourite moments in the entire series. Homura just puts her entirety out there, a side of her we haven't seen since the final moments in the original series. Except this time it's, honestly, an even more raw, even more devastating side to her we hadn't fully gleaned in the first season. She cannot hold back the tears and hold back her loneliness and fear. Prior to this labyrinth, Homura was slowly but surely beginning to doubt her recollection of Madoka Kaname in the real world, being the only person who seemingly remembered her. She knew in her heart that Madoka was real, but she being the only person in existence who knew of her, it made it hard for her even to believe it. It's a genuinely tear-jerking moment, backed with an incredibly beautiful soundtrack and godlike Seiyu performance. You can really feel how lonely and big that void in her life has gotten without Madoka, and it's tragic. There is one moment in this conversation that I really want to pick out. It's a minor moment that you might miss upon first watching due to the tears, but after my second rewatch, I never realized just how important that small line actually was. Which is embarrassing to admit, because this is Madoka Magica. Everything is relevant.
Literally, even cheese! The cheese has plot significance!
Homura, unable to properly articulate the gravity of the situation in Madoka, states her feeling as if they were a dream, saying that in this dream, Madoka went far, far away, proclaiming she was all alone and no one could ever see her. It is then that Madoka says she would never do something like that. She would never go away. After all, she isn't brave enough to accept a fate that separates her so far from her closest friends and makes someone like Homura cry for her. To which Homura, in an almost unhearable voice, says, "I should never have let you do that, knowing these are your true feelings. Remember that for later."
Ooh, foreshadowing!
The writers, however, are not done just yet, for Homura then proclaims that the warmth she feels is no illusion, but she knows for a fact that this is definitely the real Madoka. But then, how? And why? What is this place, and what would Madoka be doing here? She became the Law of Cycles, right? Well, the answers lay in the one absolute truth in this movie. For Madoka to exist in this world, somebody must know of her existence prior to coming to it. The answer was always right in front of us, but we just didn't realize it. The answers lay within the witch that has created this very labyrinth. The answers lay within Homura. Homura shockingly realizes that she at some point, unaware of when exactly, had fallen into complete despair and became a witch. This entire place is her own creation, and it doesn't take much to slowly but surely realize what the writers were alluding to. You see, the movie never explicitly tells you when or why Homura became a witch in the first place, but as viewers of this series with a fair amount of knowledge, the writers trust us to fill those holes ourselves. Homura likely fell into despair during the time after the original series concluded, holding on to the memory of Madoka being the only one to seemingly recall her existence, would naturally, over time, drive her completely insane. Interacting with the people she has seen over countless timelines, pretending to be unaware of the truth, and still fighting in her solitude are all things that just culminate to drive her to the brink. Refusing to accept such a fate, her powers as a witch were able to rewrite not just the memories of her previous comrades, but even herself. Even the law of cycles, Madoka Kaname. But then we ask ourselves again, why? Why now, and why like this? For what purpose does entrapping everyone here serve? Is it just for Homura to feel a void in her heart after Madoka left? Well, my friends, as always, it's not as simple as that. But there is a certain character whose paws are always pulling at the strings of fate. A certain character who, once again, remained quiet for so long, seemingly blending in with the background. A cute, sinister entity we know as Kyubey. I couldn't believe I fell for the same trap twice. To this being, toying with people's lives is a natural part of the process within their experiments, and this situation is just no different. As we know, witches were erased from both the beginning and the end of time. Even the Kyubeys are unaware of their existence, yet inside Homura's soul gem lays the faintest trace of them. Not only that, but there exists an outlier inside this world. Kyubey briefly hears of a concept known as the law of cycles, though only Sayaka and Homura seem to recall it. These critters thrive off of knowledge, as anything and everything is useful in their grand goal of harvesting energy. The experiment in question being the separation of Homura's body and her tainted soul gem to create the phenomena of witches once more. To create a reason for the law of cycles to arise. One person who resides in this place is someone who does not seem to exist in the real world. Someone whose existence is not even known to Kyubey, and that is when they concluded that Madoka, the person who seemingly slipped into this reality but does not exist outside it, is indeed the law of cycles. These adorable little offsprings from Satan are now planning on harnessing Madoka's powers when she returns to her original form. That is objectively brilliant despite being a semi-convoluted premise. The idea of Kyubey puppeteering all of our characters' emotions in a way that best suits their ideals is just consistent throughout the entirety of Madoka Magica. The moment this reveal happens, viewers aren't exactly surprised at Kyubey's continued role as the beckoning force, but they are also reminded once again why they despise this little shit so much. The feeling you get watching this little asshole express how everything went according to their plan is both frustrating as it is brilliant. And yet, this is Madoka Magica. There is always one more surprise on the horizon, and this time, it's a surprise for Kyubey themselves. Their asphyxiation with the law of cycles demonstrates in full a vital oversight. Madoka Magica rewards people who pay attention to its rules and logic. In fact, it's a series that weirdly rewards viewers who are actually confused by certain aspects of its story. Question, my dear viewers. Of the people put into this labyrinth, who became witches previously? Well, to answer, it's Sayaka and Bebe. But again, I ask, how can they be here? Canonically, both existed and became witches, but they shouldn't exist then, right? Well, Madoka Kaname is a tricky individual. Sayaka and Bebe were removed from this law and repositioned to serve Madoka as her private secret service. Working together, they rallied the team, and rather than defeating Homura, they aimed to merely free her of her curse with Madoka's help. And in doing so, also return Madoka her memories. And now I want to discuss the moment that follows, because it is this very sequence that I find to be my absolute favourite moment in the entirety of Madoka Magica. Studio Shaft follow up with some of the most expressive and surreal animation I have ever seen, in a sequence that balances character dynamics and developments with just some overall kick-ass animation and fight choreography paced to a masterfully brilliant Calafina track called MŠomīļoso. It is a moment that utilizes animation in full, every frame with excessive detail. I mean, look at this little animation, huh? All she did was a little flip, and she landed on the platform. They didn't need to do that, but they did. It's awesome! This sequence just encapsulates the beauty and grandness that animation can present. It's a spectacle that can only be achieved in this medium. Through drawings alone, we get great depths of space and field, And we also get chemistry between characters. It's emotional, it's beautiful, it's truly what Madoka Magica is all about in one beautiful montage. Everyone teams up, collaborating with one another to help save Homura from her pain, all the while Homura shunning herself, angry at herself for all she has caused, but also begging them not to save her as is such a fitting end and punishment for her. But also deep down, just not wanting to say goodbye to Madoka again. It's beautiful, man. Just, thinking about it gets me emotional. I love the dichotomy as well. Watching two polar opposite mindsets essentially pour out their views and watching actions being taken in support of those ideas makes for such an engaging fight. That is, if you can even call this a fight in the first place. Those feelings do eventually reach her through a beautiful collaborative attack between Madoka and Homura as a perfect send-off to this labyrinth. Both known to wield a bow, have theirs combined as one, as if Homura and Madoka have accepted each other's feelings in full. With their resonance in twain, they fire an arrow into the sky and, well... we see a bunch of Kyubeys just get obliterated with arrows and, goddamn, it makes me hornier than sex ever could. Is it too late to mention I changed my jacket? The movie is finally reaching its grand conclusion. Homura's real body lays dormant in the real world, but it's still human. And while her soul gem has become tainted, the law of cycles has finally come back. Madoka has returned to her true form with her memories all in one place. She appears in the form we recall in the last episode of the previous season, a sight we thought we would never see again. It's such a breathtaking moment to watch unfold. She begins her descent, bewildering everyone, ready to appease Homura and save her from becoming a witch. The conclusion we've been awaiting, the bittersweet redemption we were preparing our emotions for. And yet, it is in that anticipation that the writers decide to tell one final lie. Madoka Magica is not over. Homura is not ready to say goodbye. Awake and aware, in an act of rebellion, she grabs Madoka and physically tears her apart from her godhood, and instead harbors the power herself. Homura, wanting to give the person she loves most the chance to live a normal life, steals her role from her. But this intense and twisted version of love causes her to become what she proclaims is essentially a demon. If Madoka was the girl who became an angel to save everyone, that would make her replacement Homura the girl who became a devil to save just one person. Though it's not all doom and gloom. In fact, some could argue, while not morally right, this system works well enough, if not better. After all, Homura is still able to interact with the real world and has the ability to dispel witches at a sheer glance. Homura has accumulated a power far beyond the law of cycles now, stripping Sayaka and Bebe of their abilities and giving them and everyone else a chance to live a normal life, while slowly but surely wiping their memories entirely. Kyubey now is also completely under Homura's control with no chance of escaping, forever trapped by Homura's powers. So that leaves one question. What of Madoka now? Well, she exists here, in the real world again, rewritten back into the universe as if nothing happened. Rewritten to the universe without any chance of her becoming a magical girl ever again. Well, so Homura thinks. Homura's goal from the beginning of the series seemingly is realized, and it only took a few words to remind her of that goal, to remind her that she still never completed it. Homura plans on restarting her friendship with Madoka to rebuild what was seemingly lost, but her approach seems different to last time. The character balance feels strange, and not only that, but Madoka has a strange feeling inside of her, as if she shouldn't be here, as if there is something she needs to do, and just as her powers are about to reawaken, Homura stops her. Homura then recites the very lines she has been saying over and over again in every timeline. The same spiel we have heard over and over again. Same spiel we heard the start of the series. The words Homura thought she could finally escape from. But this time, the conversation continues. This time, Homura proclaims that she and Madoka will end up enemies someday. In this new world with that horrible future in the horizon, the film comes to an end. But after the credits roll, we get one final look at this series before a 10-year silence ensues. Homura dances to a whimsically scary tune, happy at how the world has now fallen into her fingertips, knowing in this world that she can protect Madoka and be with her forever. She dances over the beaten-up corpse of a barely conscious Kyubey. For the first time ever, the incubators are feeling the very despair they have put onto the world. For the first time ever, the incubators are feeling fear. For the first time ever, the fate of the universe is no longer in their hands, but are instead in the hands of the very person they have tormented for years. I love that ending. I love that ending so much. It's chilling and unsettling, but above all else, it's not conclusive. And a weird part of me didn't hate that idea. But I can't deny that craving for more always existed, and thankfully that craving will come to pass in the early parts of next year. We Madoka Magica fans have eagerly awaited for over 10 years a continuation to this absolutely masterful story, and finally came the 10th of September in the year 2023, a release date. A confirmation that this incredibly amazing story is not just over. In fact, there could even be more after it. I'm also so happy just to see Akiyuki Shinbo's work yet again, and so proud of this community for supporting Madoka Magica for all this time. We have waited for this day, and seeing it realized is truly a beautiful thing. I love this series, man. I love this series so much. If that wasn't somehow already painfully obvious, I mean, look at the fucking runtime of this video. This series just means a lot to me, and it means a lot to a lot of people around the world. And I'm just truly happy that, even to this day, such a fantastic story still exists in the hearts of so many people. It really is something special, and it really is a series that just stands for something important. It shows us that, no matter how lonely we may feel, no matter how dark things get, we are truly never alone. There is always light, always a voice that's cheering us on. Sure, that voice is quiet, and at times it's timid and frail, but that voice exists, and it's still calling out to you. The question is simply, are you going to call it back?